Salams, this is People's Dispatch and you're watching the Daily Debrief coming to you this Monday from our studios here in New Delhi with me, Siddhant Ani. Today we look at Palestinian Prisoners' Day and the conditions in which the Israeli occupation still houses thousands of Palestinians. We also talk about the strain on South Korea and US relations after the intelligence leaks earlier this month. And finally, Australia has lost its first Indigenous woman test cricketer. We look at the impact she had on the sport and outside. First up, April 17th marks Palestinian Prisoners' Day, established by the Palestinian National Council in 1974 as a national tribute to honor thousands of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli occupation prisons and to, of course, support their legitimate right to freedom. The Prisoners' Day coincides with this year with the escalation of the occupation's aggression against Palestinian people and the perpetration of systemic crimes and human rights violations. The occupation continues to detain over 4,400 prisoners, which includes over 30 women and 160 children. 530 administrative detainees have also been held or are being held currently without charge or trial. Abdul covers the region for People's Dispatch and is with us in studio now. Abdul, tell us first about the conditions which are being perpetuated and in fact even being worsened in Israel's prisons, particularly after the coming to power of the latest coalition government led by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, before that, there is some minor correction in the data you just presented. The actual number of Palestinian prisoners has gone up to 4,900 plus.
Right.
And the administrative detainees, the number has crossed 1,000. So, and since Israeli forces detain Palestinians in hundreds of numbers every week, at least, so these numbers are quite flexible. So it can go up and go down because most of the people who are detained, as you rightly pointed out, some of them are administrative detainees. And administrative detainees, they are kept in prison without any trial, without any charge for 6 months, and then that period is extendable. It means the numbers which we give basically are not fixed numbers, and they go very easily go up and go down. So, okay, as far as the Ben-Gvir's period of as a minister of related to prisons and internal security in Israel is concerned, this is, of course, the worst phase, and both in terms of the Palestinians in general in the occupied territories and Palestinians inside the Israeli prison. For the basic reason, of course, nobody is saying that the administrations before this current administration was more humane and so on and so forth. But the point is, this is the most extreme, in fact, on the verge of racist. Some of the people are arguing that this is a racist administration, which basically believes in the legitimacy of apartheid. They believe in two different rules for Israelis and for Palestinians. If you just look at the kind of policy initiatives, quote unquote, he took when Ben-Gvir became the police minister or the interior security minister in November, he basically started with reducing the minutes which is given to an individual prisoner in Shah. Looks very a small thing, but it escalates after that. He banned the visits from the Israeli members of Israeli parliament to the Palestinian prisoners. He disallowed them from working on their food production, bakeries and so on and so forth in some of the Israeli prisons. He restricted their freedom of movement within the prison, and the number of security checks inside the prison increased crazily. It means, all this means that the common Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jail was already facing different kinds of oppression, in some cases torture, cases of torture. Basically, their suffering increased manifold. And that was the reason that last month, thousands of Palestinian prisoners went on a mass action against Ben-Gvir's policies and the treatment in the Israeli jails. If we see the number of actions by individual Palestinian prisoners against the Israeli occupation forces, prison authorities, is huge. If you see, currently there are many prisoners individually taking hunger strikes and other protest measures just to oppose their illegal detention and their treatment inside the Israeli prisons.
At a slightly broader or a more macro level, Abdul, there are, of course, people who are looking at the conditions as well as the affairs of detainees as well as ex-detainees. What is the official stand on it, and also what are the kind of measures being employed to kind of get the international community to take some kind of action to address this scenario?
Well, Palestinian Authority and other groups which are working inside the occupied Palestinian territories, some of them are, of course, Israeli human rights groups as well. For example, Adamir and others. They have raised the issue. They have tried to highlight the condition of common Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jail through their whatever links they have. Through making it public in media, which is also an important intervention given the fact that the information from within the prison is very difficult to come out, given the larger censorship policies adopted by the Israeli occupation authorities and their stands against such kind of reporting. The groups or the media which reports the problems within the Israeli occupation prisons face various kinds of persecution from time to time. So, of course, that is one of the making a statement about the current situation in the Israeli prison is itself you can say an attempt to kind of resist the occupation, and that has been done by various groups, including the Palestinian authorities, the groups which are affiliated to other Palestinian factions, resistance factions like Hamas and others. Apart from that, we have not seen anything serious going on in the international organizations. Like UN has, of course, they raised the issue of right. In fact, the idea of administration detention, which is widely followed in Israel by Israel in the occupied territories, has been various UN leaders have kind of called such practices as illegal, violation of basic human rights, violation of prisoners' rights and all. But no action, as far as the action is concerned, has been taken. Serious action has been taken. No intervention from the international organizations on those matters, which is a very sad part. Of course, it reflects the larger global politics in which Israel belongs to a category of state which are untouchable from the perspective of human rights for various reasons we all know. Apart from that, it is only the actions taken by the Palestinian prisoners and the common Palestinian masses from time to time, highlighting the atrocities against them and against the prisoners, which basically makes some impact, which has had some impact on the, for example, the mass action last month, which we were referring to a few moments ago, basically led to a reversal of some of the measures which were implemented by Ben-Gvir. So it seems that the resistance by the people is the only way forward. They cannot depend at this moment, sadly, for the international intervention, which is expected, which is legit.
All right. Thanks very much, Abdul, for highlighting the conditions actually in which Palestinian prisoners continue to struggle and, of course, keep the resistance going as well. We'll move on now to our next story. The United States and South Korea have begun air exercises involving over 100 military aircraft and, of course, targeted against North Korea in an effort to publicly reaffirm their relationship in the wake of leaked US intelligence documents, which suggest, of course, that Washington, D.C. has been spying not just on those who it doesn't consider its friends, but also those who are its allies, including the Asian nation South Korea. This also has put pressure on the leadership in South Korea to support the war in Ukraine on behalf of NATO, of course. And the leaks have also increased debate in the country ahead of South Korea's president's state visit to the United States, which is the first such visit in over a decade. Anish covers the region for People's Dispatch and joins us now via video conference. Anish, South Korea, of course, is one of the US's staunchest allies in the region. In the wake of these, and it's been a few days now, what's been the sort of domestic reaction, both from a news media perspective, as well as what maybe regular people, how they're perceiving information that the United States has been spying on its allies? Of course, nothing new, but a sort of reiteration of what we were already aware of. How is it being taken in South Korea?
Well, there are a couple of ways to look at it. In one way, if you look at it in the point of view of the government, there is very clear attempt to basically just discredit the leaks and say that the like all of these are fabricated, and we didn't have any such talks, even though they are not denying the so-called meeting in which this. So, if for those of you who do not know, basically the leak showed that South Korea was essentially, at least the security establishment was essentially divided on how to pursue arms sales to the United States during the Ukrainian war, because South Korea has this policy of not sending weapons or not sending weapons to places which would eventually reach a war zone. Obviously it doesn't want to sell weapons to Ukraine, but at a time when US is making like multi-billion-dollar weapon sales to Ukraine during the war, it was very it wasn't very decided or unanimous in actually continuing with some of its arms sales. This is happening during the UN presidency. It wasn't happening before either. So even under the UN presidency, a conservative presidency, there was a divided opinion on that matter. And so definitely this is what has been the highlight of the leaks in South Korea, at least. And the Korean government is trying to say that no such talks were happened during the meeting that it is mentioning that the so-called conversation did happen. So there is definitely some kind of a roundabout way of trying to say that it is fabricated. On the other hand, you have a very clear reaction against the UN government. The UN government is not in a very good position right now. We are seeing some of its worst. Again, it is dipping in its popularity rating. We are seeing like something like 6-month low in its popularity, and sort of like, and this is only going to add to that, considering that there has been for a while now a very clear how to put it, if not animosity, but there is some level of wariness among the Korean people towards the kind of relationship, or at least the military relationship, that South Korean government and the United States have had for several years, as including the base presence. So this is definitely, obviously, the opposition is is going all hammer and tongs. It is calling for, kicking out the NSO chief. It is also calling for a joint investigation, both from the US and South Korea. And there is some level of popularity to these demands, because a large number of people are also concerned about how United States sort of influences, the South Korean foreign policy as a whole.
Right. And sort of taking a step forward from there, on April 26th, the president of South Korea is scheduled to meet with US President Joe Biden. It's the first state visit in over a decade. So obviously pressure mounting from multiple sort of angles, Anish, on the government in South Korea. What should we expect from these talks, other than, of course, a public reiteration of the relationship between the two countries? More nuanced sort of understanding of what might happen when those talks take place, or that visit takes place?
Yeah, it is going to definitely shadow the talks, especially from the South Korean perspective. We are also looking at a sort of damage control mode that the United States has gone into, because considering the leaked documents, it has spied its allies far more than its enemies at this point, and that is really going to damage any kind of trust that even a very supportive, even if it's a right-wing, pro-NATO, conservative, whatever government that is in power, it is definitely going to affect the kind of trust that it is going to have on the US military establishment and its intelligence agencies. So there is definitely some level of attempt, there will be some level of attempt from the United States, even if it's under the table, to make some kind of damage control with South Korea, maybe maybe some kind of lucrative deals, maybe some kind of concessions. We do not know for sure, but definitely this is going to shadow it, because there is definitely going to be pressure from home. We are already seeing rallies being taken out by the Democratic Party, the South Korean Democratic Party, calling for a resignation, calling for accountability on the matter, not just for the leaks, but also the kind of manner in which the South Korean government, knowing that there is going to be risk of their weapons ending up in a war zone, they eventually did decide to continue with the arms trade. So there is definitely going to be significant pressure on the government, and that is definitely going to affect the manner in which these talks happen. Obviously, we when we talk about such high level talks, and everything is not going to be transparent. So there is definitely going to be some level of closed doors meeting and negotiations happening on this front as well. We can expect that, but we need to see how the South Korean government first handles things at home. First of all, how it is going to respond to the demands of resignations or investigations, and it is from there that we can assume something once the talks begin.
All right, thanks very much. It'll be interesting to see whether they take the approach that governments around the world seem to be taking these days, Anish, which is just to brazen it out and see what happens next. But we'll come back to you for updates as and when they do come up. Thanks for today. And finally, on the show today, we remember Faith Thomas, who passed away at the age of 90. Faith Thomas was the first woman cricketer with Aboriginal heritage to play Test cricket for Australia back in 1958. Faith Thomas also had an incredible career in medicine, in nursing more specifically, and impacted the lives of thousands of people both in her community and outside of it. Her story has also been somewhat belatedly recognized by various governments and other sporting authorities in Australia, adding to the conversation around Indigenous people, Aboriginal people, Torres Straits Islanders, and their contribution to what is essentially Australia's modern sporting history. Joining us to talk about Faith Thomas is senior sports writer, senior cricket writer Sharda Ogra. Sharda, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today. Sharda, first up, tell us a little bit about the cricketing life as well as the other sort of fields in which this lady, known fondly as Auntie Faith, the kind of life she had actually.
Faith Thomas was an extraordinary personality, an extraordinary presence, almost till very late not recognized. She was a fast bowler. She came from, this huge Aboriginal community that did play cricket. She also belonged to what is called the stolen generation, which are the young children that were taken away from their families, Aboriginal families, and made to live with white people, sort of trying to almost take the color out of them, was this ghastly phrase that was there. But she did. She grew up. She went back to her community, and she lived this extraordinary life where she worked as a nurse. She found that the people that looked after her when she was a child, she took great inspiration from them. And she was an extraordinary cricketer who played Test cricket for Australia, where she was recognized. And this is like the 1950s and the 60s, where there was definitely an anti-Aboriginal sort of a Aboriginals are not recognized as people to be merged with the white Australian society in that sense. I mean, they were having, which is Anglo society, the post-World War generation was coming in from Italy and from parts of Greece, and they were facing sort of a racist opposition. So you can imagine what someone like Faith Thomas went through. She lived until the time of her death. She lived in a place sort of very north of Adelaide, called Snake's Head, the Aboriginal name for Snake's Head. And there was a great article that Siddharth Moga did when he went from Cricinfo, went and met her and talked about her life. And she was recognized belatedly, but recognized when she was alive. There's a lovely photographs of her with Belinda Shutt, the Australian cricketer. There's a trophy named after her. There's a trophy named after Jason Gillespie. So it's almost like, even though there was a great where Kevin Rudd, the Australian Prime Minister in 2008, made an apology to the indigenous Australian people. It's taken more than 10 or 15 years for their presence to be recognized in sport. The first sporting team to leave Australia, group of official sport, not official, like a first planned organized sporting to leave Australia was in 1868, and it was a men's Aboriginal cricket team. They are literally whitewashed from their story virtually, but now you're hearing the tales about them, you're hearing stories about them, and so Faith Thomas is the woman's side of that story, Siddharth.
And what kind of impact has the life of Faith Thomas and has her own, apart from whatever personal impact she's had on the community and those she's interacted with, the legacy that she leaves behind, what kind of impact has it had on the current generation of athletes in Australia?
I think over the last few years, there has really been a question of going to these people and recognizing them, and going to the Aboriginal community and their involvement and athletes. We always had heard of Yvonne Bullagong Colley and of Kathy Freeman. So you knew that they were, Australian athletes of Aboriginal descent, not so much in cricket. Ashley Barty's name is the one that everyone's familiar with now. But cricket has been slightly more conservative in this matter. But in the last 2-3 years, you've seen more and more athletes, more and more cricketers who have had Aboriginal heritage, being proud of it, talking about it, going out into the community. There are tournaments that take place, especially for the Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders, where the big stars go and they are there and they're seen. There's a medal named after an Australian cricketer, Johnny Muller, for the best performance at the Boxing Day Test match. But I'm talking about 2020. Yeah. So in 2020, the Australian Cricket Board, Cricket Australia, had a uniform which was designed, a beautiful sort of Aboriginal design on it, again to sort of pay homage to the Aboriginal history in Australian cricket. And but of course, it's quite ironical that it's being sold for $100+ Australian dollars on their website. But at least there is a recognition of all the omissions and commissions that there have been in the past.
Very briefly, Sharda, if you can, is this kind of like highlighting, because cricket is a sport that has in many ways a uniquely kind of colonial history, and particularly in the countries where it is popular today, do all of these stories contribute towards a move to decolonize cricket's past?
It's an interesting question that you ask, Siddhant, because decolonizing the past and sort of you can't change its sort of Anglo-centric, particularly in Australia, you can't change its Anglo-centric roots and its major sort of presence there, and how deep they are. This, though, is a recognition. Scott Boland, who's a fast bowler for Australia, is also of Aboriginal heritage and proud to talk about it as well. What the sort of big shift now that has to come is that how does Australian cricket look at players that are of non-Australian or non-Anglo-Saxon background in terms of their South Asian community, immigrant community, because it is Australian, if you looked at the Australian cricket team, let me say the men's or women's, you won't think that Australia was a country which had about 30% of its population came from had parents that were born outside Australia. So that is still a little bit of a balancing act that they're trying to do. But I think the recognition of Aboriginal heritage is a big step that they've taken, and particularly with involvement of women's cricket, hopefully it'll just be a sign of a much more progressive Australian cricket community in the coming decades.
Thanks very much for your time once again today, Sharda, and with that we'll also bring to a close this episode of the Daily Debrief. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories and all of the other work we do. We'll be back with another episode tomorrow. Until then, thank you for watching. Stay safe. Goodbye.